Thank you so much. Well, good afternoon. My name is Erica Barnell. As mentioned, I'm the co-founder and the Chief Medical and Science Officer at Genoscopy. I'm here to present about Colosense and how we're leveraging this FDA-approved colorectal cancer screening test to advance non-invasive screening to prevent morbidity and mortality associated with disease. So I founded the company during my first year of medical school. I had been conducting research as an undergrad in a large microbiome lab at WashU here in St. Louis. And as I matriculated to the MD-PhD program and started my clinical rotations, I started seeing the massive unmet need in gastrointestinal disease. And I don't have to tell this group, but the more research I did, the more I learned specifically about the unmet need in colorectal cancer. I personally met a woman who presented to the hospital with stage 4 colorectal cancer, and she was only 52 at the time. I know there are many people that are being diagnosed at much earlier ages now, and that incidence is rising. But when I asked this individual, you're 52, you've had time to get a colonoscopy, you're young, why didn't you do that? She mentioned that she couldn't take time off work and she didn't have the time to go get a colonoscopy. And so I thought about how I could personally impact this deadly disease. We all know it's the second leading cause of cancer-related deaths. We all know that 1 in 20 to 25 people will be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime, and the vast majority of these diagnoses will be late stage. And that results in 50,000 annual deaths in the United States each year until we do something. So I thought about what can we do, and specifically, what can I do? And that was the impetus for Genoscopy. So I mentioned I matriculated to the MD PhD program back in 2014, and I was able to pull some technology out of the university and found Genoscopy with the following principles. First, we look at stool samples. The reason being it provides a direct source of the gastrointestinal biomarkers that are associated with disease, and it allowed us to develop highly sensitive and specific tests. The second component of our technology is we are powered by RNA. So this biomarker type provides very unique insights into the phenotypic and the dynamic changes that are happening in the GI tract, and hopefully provide better insight into the real-time changes that might not be attributable to specific mutations that are necessarily pervasive across all precancerous and cancerous changes. And so over the last decade, we leveraged that technology and all of our resources and efforts at developing the first RNA-based non-invasive diagnostic test to screen for colorectal cancer. So after nearly a 9,000 patient prospective clinical validation study and 28 analytical validation studies, we obtained FDA approval for Colosense. Colosense, as mentioned, is an RNA-based stool test approved in May of 2024 for colorectal cancer and advanced adenoma screening in average risk individuals over the age of 45. It's first-line indication for use for both colorectal cancer and advanced adenoma. And importantly, we're currently partnered with LabCorp to permit access and broad access to patients. We expect to launch this test commercially in the first quarter of 2025. For reference, I've provided the approved labeling that we've received from the FDA. As mentioned, this is a first-line indication. Importantly, we have that indication for precancerous lesions. And if those lesions are detected and successfully removed, the hope is that we can actually prevent the development of colorectal cancer rather than just be telling patients that they have a late-stage disease. And that's the impetus for our use of RNA biomarkers specifically for this diagnostic test. With this indication, we're working towards integrating into the colorectal cancer screening guidelines, including CMS, ACS, and USPSTF, to ensure coverage and no out-of-pocket costs for patients. I briefly wanted to talk about the clinical validation study that supported the pre-market approval application and ultimate FDA approval of Colosense. So in this study, I mentioned that we evaluated 8,920 subjects who were average risk and were undergoing assessment with Colosense, as well as completing a colonoscopy as part of that clinical trial. Subjects were reflective of the intended use population who were over the age of 45. In that prospective cohort, we observed a 94% sensitivity for colorectal cancer, a 46% sensitivity for advanced adenomas, and an 88% specificity for no findings on a colonoscopy. I think importantly, we were the first sponsor to ever assess colorectal cancer sensitivity in a younger patient population. So as most of you know, 45 is the new 50. And for patients 45 to 49, we observed 100% sensitivity for colorectal cancer and a 45% sensitivity for advanced adenomas, which is the age group that is most adverse to colorectal cancer screening and specifically adverse to receiving an invasive screening option such as colonoscopy. So it's important that we demonstrated our sensitivity profile in this patient population. These data were summarized in a peer-reviewed manuscript and published in JAMA in October of 2023. So I think Colosense, when you look at kind of the landscape of non-invasive screening, compares well against other tests that have been reviewed and approved by the FDA for average risk screening. So while no head-to-head study has been completed to date, I've provided the data that represents sensitivity and specificity reports from separate pivotal trials that have undergone peer review independently. The first 3 bars represent stool-based tests that have been FDA approved or cleared by the FDA, and the second 2, Shield and Septin 9, represent tests that have been cleared or approved that are blood-based. As mentioned, Colosense had 94% sensitivity for CRC, 46% sensitivity for AAs, and for all other findings, we had 86% specificity and 88% specificity for no lesions on a colonoscopy. I've also mentioned this, but I think it's important to note that we did not have any limitations with regards to labeling, where we've seen with both blood tests that have been approved by the agency, there are certain limitations. For example, Shield's indication for use did not necessarily include advanced adenomas, and there's a precaution label to warn physicians of the low sensitivity for stage 1 colorectal cancer. Similarly, for the Septin 9 test, the indication for use is that it can only be offered if they have a documented history of non-compliance with CRC screening. When I think about the impact of an accuracy profile, like the ones that we're describing, I like to look at the health economics research that has been conducted to date to understand how these accuracy profiles and how these non-invasive tests can prevent the development of colorectal cancer and prevent colorectal cancer-related deaths. So this past fall, Dr. Lauterbach produced a very impactful research study in the Annals of Internal Medicine that was a cost-effective analysis using his MOSAIC model, which is a model to assess screening and surveillance for colorectal cancer. In this study, there was a hypothetical cohort of 100,000 individuals starting at the age of 45, and they compared individuals that did not have any screening modality, individuals that were screened with the Guardant Shield, individuals that were screened with Cologuard Plus, individuals that were screened with Colosense, and other modalities that I have not provided here. What we demonstrated is strong clinical outcomes in terms of the total number of colorectal cancer cases and deaths that are prevented relative to other 3-year interval tests. And in fact, based on the accuracy profile that I just mentioned, we had the fewest number of CRC cases and deaths across all triennial screening modalities in this external model that was published. And then I think it's also important that, while that study again did not compare head-to-head clinical trials, and while that study again did not parse out the age brackets, I think that there are advantages of looking at RNA biomarkers specifically for the younger patient populations. We know that methylation-based markers are correlated with age, and as such, tests that leverage methylation-based markers like Cologuard and Shield have shown degradation of sensitivity in younger patient populations. For example, while Cologuard showed 42% sensitivity for advanced precancerous lesions across subjects 50 and older, the APL sensitivity in the 45 to 49 patient population was only 33%. Similarly, Shield showed 13% sensitivity across all subjects, but only 4% sensitivity in subjects 45 to 49. Conversely, Colosense demonstrated 45% sensitivity for 45 to 49, which was not significantly different from the 46% sensitivity observed across the whole population. As I mentioned, the USPSTF recently lowered the age of screening from 50 to 45 and is even considering reducing it further based on an increased incidence of disease in younger patient populations. And I think it's important to note that this patient population is most likely to use a non-invasive screening modality. So when thinking about the best test for younger patients where late-stage diagnosis is high and early-stage incidence is rising, a highly sensitive test that has the ability to detect precancerous lesions at a high rate is very important. The next thing that I wanted to briefly touch on is that we recognize at Genoscopy that there's a massive colorectal cancer screening gap, not only in screening, but in patient navigation. So we recognize that if a patient has a non-invasive screening test and that test is positive, that our job is not necessarily done. And so our goal is to leverage Colosense to bridge both of those gaps and make sure that we're not only identifying individuals that are average risk that require a non-invasive screening test, but if that is positive, we're going to provide services to ensure that those patients have access to and are able to schedule a colonoscopy post a positive finding. Specifically, we've developed Colosense 360, which is a patient navigation service that provides wraparound services for individuals to help them complete the non-invasive test. And again, if that non-invasive test is positive, navigate them to colonoscopy. So we provide prescription assistance if they don't have a primary care physician. We help them understand kit delivery and kit collection and shipping it back to our laboratory. We provide communication services to ensure that the patient understands what their result means. And then we understand what their insurance and their location and any other barriers they might have to getting a colonoscopy if their test is positive. And we assist with overcoming those barriers for those patients. So in conclusion, I just wanted to reiterate that Colosense is FDA approved for average risk individuals over 45. We'll be launching commercially in conjunction with LabCorp in 2025. So if you're a physician out there and have interest in a Colosense test, please let us know, or just go to your LabCorp portal. The accuracy profile of Colosense is highly sensitive for early stage cancer and precancerous lesions, supporting our goal of preventing colorectal cancer and detecting lesions early. Colosense, powered by RNA, permits high sensitivity in younger patient populations where screening rates are low and incidence is rising. And finally, our navigation program, Colosense 360, provides unprecedented services for patients to ensure that a colonoscopy is scheduled for subjects with a positive non-invasive test, which is perfectly aligned with what Angie was describing in terms of making sure that we have comprehensive care for our patients.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to OncoDaily on YouTube. Hit the bell icon to stay updated.